Hello, first grade. I hope this video finds you well. If you watched the video from the morning assembly on Monday of this week, back when we didn't have school, Dr. Sanju gave us a little bit of a lesson from the Bible about ants. And I thought, oh, what a great topic for you guys to learn about, especially being springtime and the ants are coming out and getting about their work. And at the end of this lesson, I'll go ahead and read that passage again that he read for us as a reminder for us so we can remember that. But I wanted to give you some scientific background on ants as well. I thought it would be a fun lesson for you all. So let's get into it and start talking about these wonderful little bugs we call ants. So this here is an ant. It's probably a sight that you have all seen. You've seen some of these little guys walking around on the sidewalk, or maybe they've come and interrupted your picnic, or maybe some have even gotten into your house. And they are a small little bug, and they are a type of insect. Now, all insects have 6 legs, and many of them have wings. But I just wanted to tell you first a little bit about what a ant's body actually looks like. So this is what it's called, its anatomy. So special things that God gave it that help it to be an ant. First off, is it's divided into 3 sections. So there's 3 sections of almost all insects. There's the section that's called the head, and that is what we can see is the head. It has its eyes and its mouth on its head. They also have a thorax, and that's that middle section right there where their legs are attached. That's something called the thorax. Then thirdly, you see at the very end there's a 3rd segment, and that is called the abdomen. So when you look at an ant, you can usually see all 3 of these different sections, the head, the thorax, and the abdomen. Also, all ants have 6 legs. So I have arrows pointing to 3 of the legs, but they have 3 more on the other side. And this is kind of fun because we're used to having only 2 legs, but can you imagine having 6 legs and trying to, control all of them? And what's really amazing, if you ever watch an ant closely, you can see how fast they move their legs. They can go very, very fast for their size, which is very neat. It's amazing that they're able to be so coordinated to run along rocky ground using 6 legs. And lastly, a very special feature of ants are these little things that you might think are legs at first, but upon a closer look, you see they're not actually walking with them, but they're these little antennae right at the head of the ant. And these are what the ant uses to smell things, which is kind of funny. We don't think about ants smelling things very much, but in fact, smell is one of the most important senses that an ant has, and we'll talk about that here in a little bit. Another thing that you can't see on this picture is the ant's mouth. Now, their mouths look a little bit different than us. They don't have, teeth and lips and tongues like we do. They have what are called mandibles, and they're like these 2 pincher things that kind of go back and forth. It's kind of almost like a claw, and that's what they use to grab things. But we can't see it in this picture here. Now, the next question about ants is, where do they live? If you want to learn about an animal, it's good to know where it lives. Now, many ants live in the ground, or in a mound or an anthill. Some also live in like wood and trees and such, but we're going to just look at the ones that live in the ground right now. So this is another perhaps familiar sight from when you're outside in the summertime playing. You see a little hole in the ground, and surrounding that hole there's a pile of loose dirt. And that is actually the entrance to an ant's colony, to its underground tunnels. So this is all that we see from above ground, just a simple little hole going into the ground. But if we were to look underground, we see that it actually gets much more complicated than just a little hole. We might see a little hole, but they have lots of different rooms and hallways and secret passages all underground. I don't know if any of you have ever set up what is called an ant farm, but it's actually where you kind of get pet ants and you put them in a container, and that container has a glass wall, and it's filled with this dirt-like stuff, and you can actually see the ants dig their little tunnels down, and you can see them underground moving around and eating their food and everything. Yep, so ants have these very fancy colonies in all these tubes and rooms, some where they store food, some where they store their babies, the baby ants, and all sorts of other things like that. So if you ever see an anthill, I would advise you not to be mean and kick it over. A lot of kids like to just go and kick over an anthill, but the ants spent a lot of time building their home, and it's a lot more complicated than we think. So be kind to the ants, and be amazed at how interesting their tunnels are. It's much more complicated than what we can see above ground. Now, that brings me to the idea of ant colonies. Now, when we see an ant on a sidewalk, we normally see it as just a single ant out there. But ants actually live together in a big group called a colony. And you can kind of think of that like a city for ants. And they're all kind of one big happy family. And they all work together in order to survive. So, in an ant colony, you usually have at least several thousand ants, and sometimes you get hundreds of thousands of ants if it's a very large colony. So ants actually have a lot of buddies that they're working together with to survive, even though you might only see one or two at a time. So in an anthill, you can sometimes have thousands of ants down in there. Now, the ants actually have different roles too. Just like at school we have different roles where, like, say you are the students and I'm the teacher, and Dr. Sanju is our headmaster. We have all these different roles. Ants have different roles as too. They have different jobs that they have, and they have to work together in their different jobs in order to actually be productive. So the first kind of ant that I'm going to talk about is a worker ant, and this is what most ants in any colony are. They're almost all worker ants. The worker ants, just like their name suggests, they go out and do work. They go and find food, they build the nest, they care for the young, they do lots of the work that is involved in taking care of an anthill. So these are the ants that you normally see out on the sidewalk. They're worker ants. The second type are the male ants. Now, the male ants actually do have wings. They're a little bit smaller than the female ants with wings. We'll talk about that in just a second. But their main job in life is to fertilize the female ant. That means basically making it so that her eggs can hatch and have little baby ants. So they help make the baby ants. And the female ant, which is also called the queen ant, her job is to lay eggs for the colony. And she's usually quite a bit bigger than the other ants. And she also has wings, and she is probably the most important single ant in the colony. She lays eggs all day, and depending on the ant, she might even be able to lay millions of eggs in her lifetime, which that's quite a few. So most colonies only have one, or some have several queen ants. Some only have a single queen ant, so she's very important, because if she stops laying eggs, if something happens to the queen, then you stop getting more ants, and your ant colony can't keep growing. So you need that female queen ant in order to keep the colony going. So the other ants will try to protect her as best they can. In fact, actually, there's some worker ants that are actually soldier ants, and they're a little bit bigger and stronger, and they can actually defend the nest from intruding threats, which is pretty cool. They have like a little army. And sometimes ant colonies do have wars with armies, and you'll see them all fighting each other. I saw that last summer on a sidewalk, which is very interesting. But anyways, I wanted to close by telling you just some really cool facts about ants, because though they might look really simple, there's a lot of interesting things going on, and God gave them a lot of special abilities that we don't have. And the first of those abilities is their sense of smell. So remember I said that on their head they have those two little things called antennae? Those antennae actually help them smell. It's almost like a nose out on a stick, so they can smell things on the ground in front of them. And what ants do is they actually, wherever they go, they leave a trail of smell, which is interesting, something we don't do, hopefully. But they leave a trail of smell, and it's an invisible trail that they can't see. Those things are called pheromones. It's a chemical that they can smell very well. And that way, they can actually follow different paths. So say you have an ant going out on a summer day, and it finds a loaf of bread sitting out in the grass. And he wants to tell all his other ant friends about that bread so that they can come and get it too. He'll go back to the nest, and he'll leave a pheromone trail, so a smelly trail that the other ants can then follow and find the bread. So ants communicate with smell, which is really interesting. And that's why sometimes you see ants in a line, because they're all following that same smelly trail that the one ant had left. And that's also why if you drop a potato chip out on the ground on a summer day, sometimes you'll come back 10 minutes later and it's covered in ants. And that's because one ant found it and he told the others with smell where it is. Another cool thing about ants is that they're really strong. They can lift up to 50 times their body weight. So let's say I'll take so let's say you have a kid who's weighing about 100 pounds. I don't know if any of you are 100 pounds or not. You might be a little bit lighter than that right now, I think. But if you were a 100-pound kid and you could lift 50 times your weight, you could lift something that's 5,000 pounds. That's 2.5 tons, which is really, really heavy. So God made ants to be very, very strong so that they can carry things back to their nest, including food and other things like that. Other neat things about ants would be things like, you know how I said they have battles? Sometimes when ants get hurt in a battle, their fellow soldier ants will actually carry them back to the nest. So they'll go in and take the injured ants, the ones that got hurt, and bring them back to the nest so that they can recover. So they don't just leave them out there to die. So they actually care for one another in some regard, which is kind of cool. I think that is enough about the fun facts about ants for right now. There are plenty out there, like the ways they hear and feel things and lots of interesting stuff, but I'll leave that for another day. And I wanted to close by rereading the passage that Dr. Sanji read for us on Monday, from Proverbs 6, starting in verse 6. Go to the ant, O sluggard, consider her ways and be wise. Without having any chief, officer, or ruler, she prepares her bread in summer and gathers her food in harvest. So basically what this is saying is that we shouldn't be lazy. We should do work when we're supposed to do our work, just like the ant does. If you watch an ant out on the sidewalk, she just goes about doing her work, and she doesn't complain about it. She knows what she needs to do, and she goes and does it. And then when it comes time to eat and time for the harvest, she can enjoy that because she's already put the hard work in. So I just wanted to read that again for you, just to give you a reminder, because it's helpful to hear things multiple times, just to remind us of God's truth. But anyways, that is all that I have for you right now. Hope that you enjoyed this lesson on ants, and maybe you could go outside and you catch a few and watch them under a magnifying glass or something. It'd be a fun activity for you all. But anyways, until next time, take care.